Numbers are Josh Solinger's thing, which is perfect since he serves as the finance director for the city of River Falls. On this episode of the Kinni Cast, Josh joins to share his passion for helping residents understand how their tax dollars support the services and projects shaping our community. He discusses the city's annual budget, how the city funds major projects like the upcoming fire station renovation, and gives his outlook on the long-term financial health of River Falls. So get your calculators out as you tune into this brand new Kinni Cast episode with Finance Director Josh Solinger. Hi River Falls, welcome back to another episode of the Kinni Cast. My name is Tyler Mason, and on today's episode we're going to be talking about finances and taxes and all those fun things that maybe you think about when it comes to being a resident of River Falls, maybe you don't, and hopefully this will kind of help educate folks a little bit on taxes and how the city does things in that regard. And joining me is somebody who loves to get into this kind of stuff, Josh Solinger, our finance director. Josh, how are you today?
Good, how are you?
Good, I'm excited to dive into this a little bit. I know you're pretty passionate about this stuff, so I think we'll have some good conversation here.
I am always game to nerd out on this stuff, so thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, maybe start with you a little bit. So your first introduction to River Falls dates back, actually you were a management analyst fellow over a decade ago. Do you want to maybe share what that program, that fellow program is, and then what you enjoyed about your time as a fellow that ultimately led you back here?
Yeah, over a decade ago. It's crazy how time flies. So the fellow program is designed to, so first off, the management analyst fellow program is part of a broader program. It's the ICMA, or the International City County Management Association. They have a nationwide fellowship program, and cities and counties across the country can participate in it if they choose to. Mm-hmm. And River Falls, we've always been very fortunate, very supportive council, supportive city administrator. We have always participated in that program. And so what it entails is it's essentially a way for students that are finishing their MPA programs, or Masters of Public Administration, sometimes Masters of Public Policy programs. It's a way for them to get into local government and get them that broad exposure to operations, to finance, to HR, you name it. If it's something a local government does, it's intended to get them exposure to it.
Sure.
And then hopefully they decide to then make a career out of it.
Yeah.
Prior to that, my undergraduate degree was in political science, with kind of an emphasis on like quantitative analysis. But I didn't have like a specific niche finance background.
Sure.
But what I did find is that in my fellowship, while I got all kinds of exposure to different facets of this particular city, I gravitated in the direction of finance. And so that set me up for a role after my fellowship ended, that then just continued on that finance trajectory.
Yeah, and eventually you ended up back in River Falls, but you took a detour after the fellowship. You worked for another city for several years before you came back here as the finance director in 2022. When you did come back, what excited you most about the opportunity to come back to River Falls?
Yeah, so I mean, River Falls is, as far as local governments go, it is unique. It's entrepreneurial. We take measured, I don't want to call it risks, but we take measured risks. We are very thoughtful in what we do, strategic in what we do, an incredibly supportive council here, just bar none, just an awesome city council.
Well, let's maybe dive into some finance stuff a little bit here, and we'll let you geek out on the numbers and all that, because numbers are not my strong suit, so I'm glad that you have a hand on this. Let's maybe start with the budget, since that's something that was recently, you gave a presentation to the city council not long ago about that. Do you want to maybe just explain how the budget process works for the city here, and then also maybe what residents should know about the city's annual budget, and maybe how it impacts them?
Yeah, so I mean, I think I could start with the process, and I would say that, first and foremost, it's probably a 4 to 5 month long process internally for kind of the departments to compile their recommended or their proposed budgets that then get reviewed at kind of the finance and administrative level, and then ultimately by the council. So it's a long process, much of which certainly occurs internally, but there are a number of public hearing opportunities. So we have at least one workshop that's open to the public, where we talk to the council about the budget, what goes into it. And then because the budget is adopted by ordinance, it goes to council twice. So there's a first hearing, and then there's a second hearing, which is when it's finally adopted. Also when the tax levy gets adopted. Those are also opportunities for council members to ask questions, for the public to voice their opinions, support, concerns, what have you. And so there are several built-in opportunities for the public to engage in the process. But what I would also say is, what residents should know about the annual budget is that it ultimately comes back to the city's long-range fiscal plan. So one of the things that I really did like about this opportunity when I came here is the fact that this city maintains a long-range fiscal plan. You do not see that. I would even posit you don't see it in most cities. And so it's a way for us to essentially create a roadmap for how much tax levy will be needed over the next decade, what that means in terms of the annual growth of the city portion of the tax levy, how it gets applied, how we're going to budget in different kind of functional areas of the city. And then essentially we just work that plan. Now, because we're nimble and adaptive and all those fun things, we certainly course correct as we go. But, and a recent example of that would be Emerald Ash Borer. We didn't know at, probably the last time this fiscal plan was put together 3 or 4 years ago even.
Right.
We didn't know Emerald Ash Borer would be the issue that it turned out to be.
For sure.
So we course corrected. But essentially that fiscal plan sets a framework so that we feel strongly that we, levy tax dollars responsibly. I would even say predictably. And then the city council has various policies about how much debt we have, how much that tax levy increases by. And then of course we even have other external things like a Moody's credit rating, right? That gets issued for us every time we go borrow money. So we have these things, these ways we can measure how well we're doing, and it all comes back to the fiscal plan. And we use that fiscal plan, frankly, as the framework then for when we do our budget development. So there shouldn't be any surprises unless they're external surprises.
Sure.
And then we adapt.
Right.
So
I think in the presentation you mentioned snow can impact the budget, and just based on how much snow we get in a year and what that means for our public works crew. So yeah, some variables there that I assume kind of throw a wrench on things from time to time.
yeah, I don't think any of us really want to see a ton of snow.
My
I
son
certainly
does,
don't.
but
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to see it because obviously it impacts our budget and our kind of our projections for where we think the year will end. So all things we keep track of and keep an eye on.
Now, I know that there's a question that has seemingly been common this year in the community is how the reassessment that took place earlier this year of property values, how that might impact people's taxes. Do you want to maybe shed some light on that, and if there's any misconceptions that either you've heard of or that people might have that maybe you could just kind of clarify what that all means and how that impacts the residents?
Yeah, I mean, so this is a really, it's more complicated than one might assume, and there's a lot to unpack here when you get into assessments and taxes. So I'm gonna do my best to do this adequate justice here.
Sure.
And what I always say about finance, what my job entails in things like taxes and assessments and things, is that the math is actually quite simple, right? Like I'm not sitting here doing algebra or anything.
Sure.
But there are oftentimes many moving parts, and the numbers are often large. But that's kind of it. Like you have to kind of take that systems thinking approach to all of this and kind of understand the moving parts and the various impacts of them, and then just be ready to work with some large numbers. And that's it in a nutshell.
Sure.
So to kind of get into that a little bit, I mean, when you talk about your mill rate, right, which is essentially the number that is multiplied by the value of your property to come up with your tax bill. That mill rate, how you get there, and it's usually like a 9-digit number, and it's less than 0. And it's comprised of all of the taxing jurisdictions in the community. So the city's taxes, the school district's taxes, depending on what county you're in, either St. Croix County or Pierce County's taxes that are levied on properties in River Falls. And then last would be Chippewa Valley Technical College. So that's your mill rate. That's what the mill rate is comprised of. And like I said, it's usually a 9-digit number. Now how you get there is you take the tax levy. So for the city of River Falls, it's about $8.5 million. And you divide that number by the assessed value, which is a much bigger number, like $1.9 billion. And because you're taking a number that's about 8.5 million and you're dividing it by a number that's about 1.9 billion with a B,
Right.
you're going to end up with that 9-digit number,
Yeah.
right? And frankly, it's longer than that, but you're able to take it to the 9th digit. So that's the math. I mean, it's simple division.
Sure.
It's just big numbers. And so when it comes to a reassessment and the way it impacts people's taxes is I think one of the misnomers I often hear is people assume that just because the value of their property went up in the reassessment, that automatically means that their taxes will go up.
Right.
And yes, you will often see your tax bill go up from one year to the next. But again, there's a lot of moving pieces that go into that. It's not solely or only because of the reassessment. So if you take your tax levy and you increase that by, say, 4%, but the assessed value that you're dividing that tax levy by goes up by 30%, you're actually going to end up with a mill rate that's lower. And in fact, that is what happens when you do these revaluations, is the mill rate actually drops because you're taking a tax levy that only increases by a relatively small amount. And again,
Right.
the city council has a policy where we can only increase it by about 4% per year. And in fact, for this upcoming year, it's about 2.5%. But the number you're dividing that by went up by about 30%. So the math just naturally follows that your output's going to be significantly lower than.
Sure.
So yes, the value of your property went up, but you're multiplying that by a mill rate that dropped significantly. So if your property, for the community, it went up by about 30 or 35%, something like that. If your property value similarly was reassessed about 30 to 35% higher, just because of the revaluation alone, you should not see a significant or any change to your tax bill.
Sure.
If your property value went up less than what the average was for the community and the tax levy did not change, your property tax bill would actually go down. If your property was revalued higher, say 40 or 50% higher,
Right.
which would be more than the community-wide average, and again, if the tax levy didn't change, your tax bill would in that situation go up. But we know the tax levy doesn't stay the same.
Right.
Like I said, the cities went up by about 2.5%. I don't know off the top of my head what the school districts went up by, the counties went up by, Chippewa Valley Technical Colleges went up by, but levies often are going to go up from one year to the next because we're competing with all of the same inflationary pressures that households do. So our cost to provide snow plowing, we'll stay on the topic of snow here for a second, our cost to do the snow plowing goes up from one year to the next because of inflation. The materials we use, the equipment we use, wages, things like that. Like there are a variety of inflationary pressures, and so our costs go up. And so you end up having to levy more dollars to keep up with that inflation. So you will see your tax levy go up. So
Right.
again, I'm not trying to suggest here that people are going to see their tax bill stay the same or go down. It really depends on a variety of moving parts. But the revaluation alone does not necessarily mean your tax bill will have gone up, because while your value of your property went up, the mill rate it's multiplied by went down.
Sure.
So-
Yeah. One thing you talk about quite a bit is tax increment districts, or TIDs, and also tax increment financing. Can you maybe explain a little bit about what each of those is?
Yeah, so tax increment financing is something that you see in a number of states in the country. It is a tool to induce economic development, and how you specifically go about doing that looks a little different in every state.
Sure.
In Wisconsin, there really aren't any tools to induce economic development outside of tax increment financing. So that really is the tool in Wisconsin. And how TIF is applied in each state also is different. The laws are different. So for Wisconsin, TIF or tax increment financing is the primary tool. And what you do is you create a district, a geographical boundary, which then is a TID or a tax increment district. And within that district, what you essentially do is you incur costs to induce that economic development. And then as growth occurs within that geographical boundary, all of the taxes collected from that growth come to the city rather than to the other taxing jurisdictions. They still receive taxes based on the value of the properties in that district before the TID was created. But then after the TID is created, all of that, they call it increment, all of the increment or the growth that occurs, all of the taxes from that growth or increment go to the city to essentially pay itself back for all of the costs it incurred to induce that development. Maybe new roads are put in, sewer,
utilities,
water. Yes, thank you. Yeah, utilities, streets, all of that are costs the city incurs to induce that growth.
Right.
And then when the growth comes in, it essentially is paying for itself, and it will continue to do so. TIDs can stay open for anywhere from 20 to 27 years. And then once that's done and the TID terminates, all of those taxing jurisdictions then get to collect taxes on the new value of the district post-closure. And so because those districts are, collecting increment on value that's pre-TID, in Wisconsin, they actually limit how much of a community can be in a tax increment district.
Yeah.
So it's in Wisconsin, I believe it's 12% of the total community's equalized value, they call it, can be in a TID. And then, like I said, once the district closes, mission accomplished, you brought in this growth, all of the costs that were needed to induce that growth have been paid, the district closes, all of that added value, which in some cases for River Falls, we have added thousands of % of value in some of our districts. The taxing jurisdictions then get to collect their taxes off of all of that value once the district closes.
Sure. And a lot of that is, corporate parks are within some of those, or I guess what other areas in town are currently within a TID?
Yeah, so there are a couple of small districts downtown where very specific types of development were induced. Some multifamily, like senior housing and things like that. For the most part in River Falls, though, it would be in our corporate parks. So on the north side of town, you've got Whitetail Ridge Corporate Park, Sterling Ponds Corporate Park, our New Man Valley Corporate Park. And how cities in Wisconsin set up their TIDs also varies. You see some cities do a lot more redevelopment with their districts. They will set up a district, they'll acquire the property within that district, demolish it, build new stuff there. River Falls tends to take much more of a greenfields development approach. So not going in and buying properties and demolishing them and building new things there. It's more of we've identified an area of land that we believe is suitable for corporate park type development. Buy the land, get the infrastructure in place, and then bring the development in.
Sure.
And it tends to be on the kind of the outsides of the city, if you will. So you don't see as many downtown districts anymore. You also tend to see outside of corporate parks. Another thing I do like about how we do our TIDs here in River Falls compared to how I've seen other cities do it is when you are in a downtown or a more dense area, we tend to do smaller districts, like single parcel sized districts. So it's targeting a specific project on a specific parcel. It mitigates risk. I've seen cities that will target a downtown area and they'll do a very large district for only a couple parcels. And what could end up happening in that case is you assume all the risks of what happens to the properties that are in the district, but not necessarily intended to be developed. So you can run into situations where instead of increment, which is what you're after, you can end up with decrement because maybe the values drop elsewhere in the district, even if it's not what you intended your district to be. So I love our approach. I think it's responsible. It does tend to lean a little conservative, but it's kind of you're inducing development, which is always carries some inherent risk there. But I think we do it responsibly. We have a lot of success with the districts we have, and we do mitigate risk, I believe, in the way we do it here.
Yeah. We've discussed on previous podcast episodes some of the big ongoing projects like the library renovations and the fire station, which is going to be underway pretty soon here. I'm curious, how does the city budget for large projects like that?
So it all comes back to identifying the underlying funding sources. So it's one thing to have a budget. You set your budget up and there it is. Well, I mean, at the end of the day, your budget is only as good as the funding sources you have, right? So I would say we're very successful. We've been very successful over the last couple years at pursuing grant funding. So for the library, for instance, what's happening there right now is solely grant funded. What's happening with the fire station is part grant, part tax levy, and part funding by our Rural Fire Association, which is comprised of surrounding townships. And so when it comes to something like the fire station, we'll just stay on that one because you have a few moving parts there. I think it's important to illustrate for folks that we're very intentional about the scope of the project because, again, we have a fiscal plan. We have a long-range fiscal plan. We understand what our targets are for how much we increase taxes by and what that means for people's tax bills, how much debt we want to keep in any given year, and how quickly we're paying off old debt, how quickly we're bringing on new debt, and that whole mix, right? So there's debt management, there's cash management, there's tax levy management that goes into this. And so when it comes to the fire station and developing that budget, the first question is, well, what are our targets for those things? And what's the need? What do we need with this fire station project? And then how do we find that happy medium, that happy middle ground of fiscal responsibility, but also meeting the needs of a fire station and a fire department in a growing community? And that's it. That's it in a nutshell. And then we have a lot of really good conversations. We talk about it with our city council multiple times. We get input from our end users, the firefighters themselves, all those good things, right? So we had a really intentional design development process where we crafted what we believe is a responsible scope that meets the needs of the department. And then we determine essentially how much cash financing we can do, how much tax levy we think this is going to mean moving forward, how much debt we're issuing, again, how much grant financing is coming in. So in this case, it's about a $10.5 million project. $1.4 million coming from the federal government in the form of a grant. And then we're applying about, and this is where we get into that snow conversation again. So we need to see how the rest of our winter unfolds for us. But, if it's a harsh winter and we end up with a lot of additional snow operating costs, then we're likely going to be cash financing close to $1.5 to $1.6 million. If it's a mild winter and we don't incur a lot of those costs, then we believe we'll be able to cash finance closer to $2 million of the project because we're very intentional about cash management here as a city, and we have these strategies and benchmarks about fund balance, essentially, and we have a target for how much fund balance we want to keep for strategic opportunities like this. And then the rest comes in the form of borrowing. So we'll borrow, and then we'll make annual payments for the next 20 years on that. We do have the Rural Fire Association that's contributing a large sum of money toward that annual debt service payment. And then the remainder is then what would be put on the tax levy. And again, because we have that wonderful fiscal plan, we're able to ensure that all of that allows us to still maintain our council set targets for fiscal management.
And you've talked about the fiscal plan a few times here. As you kind of look long-term and into the future a little bit, how would you assess the long-term financial health of the city of River Falls as we take into account all the things we've talked about?
Great and improving. So it's already really solid. And whenever we borrow money, we have a financial advisor also that we're able to leverage. And the benefit of having that financial advisor is that they assist us with our borrowing, because borrowing money as a city, as a local government, is a surprisingly complicated thing to do. It's not like us going to the bank and borrowing money. There's a lot that goes into it. You've asked me to assess the long-term fiscal health. I would say that we have a very healthy fund balance in our general fund. We not only meet, but we exceed our targets. So we're able to identify strategic opportunities to then do cash financing, like with our fire station. That allows us to avoid the debt and the interest costs associated with that debt, and ultimately allows us to better manage the levy that people experience in their day-to-day lives on their tax bills.
Right.
So we can manage that well. I would say that our utilities are all in really good fiscal health as well, and those are measured a couple different ways. Similar to the general fund, you kind of have a fund balance, or in this case it's called working capital. Essentially it's a measure of how much cash you have. And we have a target to have 90 days of cash on hand for our utilities. There's also a debt management threshold, so you want your annual revenue needs to exceed so much of your debt service for that year.
Right.
And so those are the two primary ways we measure it. I know I'm getting into the weeds here,
okay.
but this is what I do. Like I said, I love to nerd out on this stuff.
I figured at some point you'd get into the weeds.
Yeah, I can't help myself. And so those are the ways we measure it. And our three major utilities, electric, water, and sewer, are on excellent trajectories there. We did just do rate increases for all three utilities, so I know folks that are listening are going to obviously be well aware of that. And the reason we did that at the time when we had several opportunities to discuss this in public hearing, open to the public settings at the Utility Advisory Board, and then with our City Council. The reason we did that is because we had not done rate increases for our utilities for quite some time. It had been 4 years, I think, or 5 for the electric utility, and then basically closer to or even more than a decade for the other two, the water and sewer utilities. So it was time.
Right.
And you could see that, right? We were very responsible, and that allowed us to not have to increase rates more frequently than that. I mean, which is, frankly, we were a little bit of a unicorn in a way for all of that. And so it had been quite some time since we'd increased rates because of how responsible the city council, our utility advisory board, and staff have always been. But it was time, right? We were dealing with a very high inflationary environment for the last several years, and we felt it. So you were seeing that in those benchmarks, a little bit of erosion there. And so now that we've set our new rates, we've bent right back the other direction. And in terms of fiscal health, even there, it's improving. And so when you look at all of the funds of the city, we went from in 2014 having about $14 million to, as of 2025, here getting close to the end of the year, we're trending toward ending the year $33 to $34 million in cash. So we've more than doubled.
Yeah.
And when you look at the equalized value of the community, we first crossed the $1 billion mark as a city in, I believe, 2017 or 2018. And so it took quite a while to reach $1 billion. Well, from that point in time to now, we have now crossed the $2 billion mark. So you can look at measuring it in a couple of different ways, but I would say that we are growing quickly and responsibly and strategically, and you're seeing it in terms of the fiscal health of this city as well. In Wisconsin, because of things like levy limits and expenditure restraint, I'm trying to avoid editorializing here too much, I would say that the state of Wisconsin puts cities in a position where your ability to raise revenues to meet those inflationary pressures I've talked about a few times in this interview, it comes down to growth. If you're not growing, the state, because of how they've set their formulas for things like tax levy increases, they cap it, which I think is an important thing for folks to know is we don't just get to go increase our tax levies willy-nilly. We have our internal policies, but there also are state-imposed limits on how much a city can increase its tax levy by. And that comes down to growth. So net new construction is what they call it, is a huge component of that limit in the formula that goes into that limit. And so if you're experiencing 3 or 4% inflation, which we've had right in these last several years, it's cooling off now, but if you think a couple of years ago, we were 3, 4, 5% inflation, if not more in certain categories of goods and services. But you're only adding about 1 to 2% net new construction. What the state of Wisconsin says is that's about how much you get to increase your levy by. And you're not keeping up with inflation.
Yeah.
So that's a big deal. And so we're growing. And fortunately, because of the growth and because of how we do budget responsibly here, and we have these amazing tools like the fiscal plan and all of the different benchmarks and policies that go into that plan, because of those things, we are in excellent fiscal health, and it's getting better.
Nice. That's good to hear. And the net new construction you mentioned, if people haven't read the recent River Falls Reader newsletter, you can find that on the city website, but the September issue, including some insight from you on that. There's a story about net new construction and what that means for the city. Well, last question for you, Josh. This is one we ask everyone on the podcast. It's not finance related, although I suppose your answer could be, but I'm curious, what sort of impact do you hope your work will have on the people of River Falls?
First and foremost, in public service, I strongly believe in leaving things better than you found them. So, non-finance answer, but
Sure.
Public service in a nutshell, maybe.
Yeah.
That's one of my core philosophies. I think about our values as a city, where we consider future generations, things like that. The work that I'm doing now, a big part of the way I think about my work is to consider those future generations. What is what we're doing now going to mean for those folks down the road? Are they going to be proud of what they've inherited from all the hard work we do now? Are they going to be in a better place for it? Are they in some, not here, but in some places around the country and the world, are they being left with messes? Like, these are the things, right? And so I hope, in a nutshell, my work will just allow those future generations to continue to thrive. And, as far as the finance piece goes, we've got folks here at the city that are out there plowing streets, doing street maintenance, doing utilities work. We've got police officers, firefighters, librarians, parks and rec staff. You can go down and down and down the line. I know I'm probably forgetting people.
Communications staff.
Come on. Yeah, communications. How dare I? These people do really important work, and I sincerely believe that. And they should, and they deserve to have good equipment that they work with. They should feel good about the work they do. They should, we should all as a city be providing high quality and effective and efficient work. And my role as the city's finance director is to just ensure that the city continues to be in a position to provide all of the folks doing really hard work for the city with the tools and the training and the expertise and the support needed to just do what they do and do it well, and to ensure that the assets that we have as a city, our streets, our parks, our utilities, our open spaces, our facilities, all are in good condition. They stay in good condition, and that we're able to not only keep what we've got in good condition, but have the groundwork in place to grow. And so those are all the things that I hope my work accomplishes.
Yeah, that's a great way to summarize it, and a great spot to wrap it up here, Josh. Well, again, Josh Solinger, our finance director, thanks so much for educating. I know I learned something today. Hopefully the people listening did as well. But yeah, thanks for taking time and sharing your knowledge on some important topics here.
Thanks for letting me geek out a little bit.
Anytime. And thank you to everybody for listening to this episode of the Kinni Cast, again with Josh Solinger, our finance director. If you don't already subscribe, you can find the Kinni Cast on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, or at rfcity.org. Look for the podcast page there. But until next time, have a great day, River Falls.